The sun had barely climbed over the jagged horizon, its first light bending through a thin veil of dust that hung in the Afghan valley like smoke from an unseen fire. The air was already warm, the kind of heat that pressed down on you before the day had even begun. A Navy SEAL team moved in silence through the wadi, their boots whispering against loose gravel. The walls on either side rose steep and close, rock faces pitted and sharp, leaning just enough to feel like they were folding in over the men. Every shadow looked deeper here, every echo softer, swallowed before it could bounce back. No one talked. The only sound was the muted shuffle of gear, the soft rasp of fabric against fabric, the faint metallic click of weapons settling against body armor. The point man, Mason, scanned the ridges as they moved, eyes constantly adjusting, mind cataloging every irregular shape. He'd been in valleys like this before. Places you passed through fast, because if someone up there wanted you dead, you'd never see it coming until it was too late. Halfway through the choke point, Mason froze. His left fist came up, knuckles tight. The team halted instantly, knees bending, weapons angling toward the rock edges above. Mason's gaze locked on a spot high on the north ridge, just a flicker, the sun catching off something that shouldn't have been there. Glass, maybe, or metal. He didn't have time to confirm. The first PKM burst tore through the stillness, ripping into the wadi with a sound that made the air vibrate in their chests. Dirt spat from the wall inches from Mason's head. Another burst, this one lower, chewing into the gravel at their feet. The valley filled with the staccato roar of incoming fire, the slap of rounds hitting stone, the whine of ricochets spinning off into the dust. "Contact! Ridge line!" someone shouted, already diving for the low embankment to their right. Mason hit the ground hard, chest slamming the dirt, breath bursting from his lungs. Around him, the others scrambled into position low, tight, returning fire in short, controlled bursts. It barely made a dent in the incoming. Then came the whoosh and corkscrew trail of an RPG. It screamed in low, slammed into the wadi wall just behind them, blasting shards of rock into the air. The concussion slapped the breath out of anyone not already pressed flat. Dust rolled over the team, thick enough to taste tawdry, chalky, bitter on the tongue. Mason crawled to a better angle, heart pounding in his ears, the world reduced to the rhythm of return fire and the mechanical motion of reloading. Every time someone shifted, pebbles slid from under their knees, pattering into the void between bursts. Multiple positions, both ridges, a voice barked through the calm, ragged and loud over the crackle. They were boxed in, no clean exit, no cover worth the name beyond the shallow lip of dirt shielding their upper bodies. The heat from the rising sun was already pushing sweat under helmets, down the small of their backs. Mason's chest heaved as he checked the line. One man down hit in the shoulder, two more pinned too tight to return fire effectively. He looked up through the haze. The ridges loomed over them, dark shapes shifting behind the rocks. Muzzle flashes flared like brief sparks against the dawn. Every instinct told him what he already knew: they weren't getting out of this wadi unless something changed, and it had to change fast. The next RPG launch echoed through the valley. They had seconds. Gunfire raked the wadi from both ends now, the sound so constant it blurred into a single, metallic roar that seemed to press against the inside of their skulls. The air was thick with dust kicked up from every impact, the sunlight slicing through in fractured beams, turning the space into a shifting haze of light and shadow. Each breath carried the acrid taste of cordite, the faint iron tang of blood drifting on the heat. Somewhere overhead, loose rock skittered down the slope with every burst, pattering into the dirt like dry rain. Mason kept low, pressed into the embankment until the grit ground into his cheek. His ears rang, every sharp report of incoming fire cutting through the muffled hum like a spike. A sharp grunt to his left made him turn. Daly, the team's breacher, sprawled on his side, dust spraying from his plate carrier. The round hadn't punched through, but the force of it had folded him to the ground, his breath coming in short, pained bursts. Before Mason could move, a second cry cut through the noise. Rivera, their rear security, was down on one knee, blood soaking into the fabric around his thigh. Doc Harris was already there, sliding in on his stomach, his kit rattling against the rock. His hands moved fast, automatic tourniquet high on Rivera's leg, cinch, twist, lock. The calm in his movements was betrayed only by the tightness in his jaw, the quick dart of his eyes toward the incoming fire. A burst chewed into the dirt just above him, spraying grit over their heads. He didn't flinch, just pushed Rivera flat and shifted to check daily, fingers probing the cracked plate for hidden damage. The team kept the rhythm alive despite the pressure short. Disciplined bursts aimed high to keep the enemy's heads down, the rest conserving what was left of their magazines. No one wasted a shot. Between volleys, they communicated in hand signals, wove fingers up for movement, a closed fist for hold, a slicing gesture toward the ridge where muzzle flashes flared. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, but the strain was there in the way shoulders hunched tighter, in the clipped edge to every breath. Static hissed over the comms, drowning out Mason's attempt to call their position. Fragments of words came through. Copy, interference, hold, but nothing clear enough to confirm. He slammed a fresh mag into his rifle, the motion practiced but heavy with the knowledge that the last 2 pouches on his belt were all he had left. Across the line, the others were running just as low. A PKM roared from the south ridge, the tracers arcing down into their position, the impacts hammering the embankment like a drumbeat. Mason ducked, counting the seconds between bursts, timing their counterfire. Sweat dripped into his eyes, stinging, but he didn't wipe it away. Another rock slide clattered down from the ridge chips of shale bouncing past his boots, dislodged by an enemy adjusting position. They were closing angles. Harris shouted over the gunfire, his voice raw. "We've got maybe 10 minutes. It wasn't panic, just fact, the kind you didn't argue with. Mason glanced down the line. Every man was locked in, firing, reloading, shifting just enough to keep the fight alive. But the walls of the wadi felt closer now, the air hotter, the space smaller with each passing second. If help wasn't already on the way, there wouldn't be anyone left to save. The next burst from the PKM never came. Instead, a sound cut clean through the roar of the firefight, a single, sharp rifle crack, nothing like the chattering rhythm that had been hammering them for the last 15 minutes. It was so precise it felt unnatural in the chaos, the kind of shot you could almost feel in your bones before you heard it. Then came the dull, final thud of a body hitting rock somewhere up on the ridge. Mason's head snapped toward the sound, scanning the slope. All he saw was heat shimmer dancing above the stone, a mirage trembling in the morning sun. No muzzle flash, no movement. Just the faint echo of that single shot fading into the dust. Before he could process it, another crack split the air. This one higher, a slightly different pitch, the result of wind cutting across the barrel from a different angle. The second target dropped tone of the enemy positions that had been pinning their rear security. Silence followed from that direction, the threat snuffed out like it had never been there. The team exchanged glances but kept their positions. No one knew where to look. Whoever was up there wasn't spraying and praying, they were hunting. Each bullet landed with surgical precision, timed between the SEAL's own bursts as if the shooter knew exactly when to slip the shots in without drawing return fire. A third report. Another enemy down. Then a fourth, quick and deliberate, dropping a rifleman before he could even finish swinging his barrel toward them. Mason's pulse hammered in his ears, but it wasn't panic, no, it was something colder. Whoever was helping them wasn't just good, they were exceptional. Dust drifted in slow coils from the high ridge where the shot seemed to come from, but there was no silhouette, no telltale glint of optics. The shooter was buried in that landscape, swallowed whole, as if the mountain itself had decided to pick a side. "Who the hell?" Daly started, but Mason cut him off with a quick hand signal. "Keep eyes forward, stay in the fight." Another shot rang out, and the last PKM position on the south ridge went silent. That one had been chewing them apart since the ambush began, its sudden absence leaving an almost uncomfortable gap in the noise. The air felt different without it, the tension shifting as the tide of fire broke apart into smaller, desperate bursts from the remaining enemy positions. The SEALs began to push back, each one firing in controlled intervals, their movements sharper now, bolder. Every few seconds, the unseen rifle cracked again, and another hostile disappeared from the fight. It was as if the shooter could see the whole battlefield laid out like a map, removing threats in the exact order that opened space for the team to maneuver. Mason's eyes kept darting toward the ridgeline, searching for any clue, but the heat haze and jagged stone gave him nothing. Just the faint smell of singed powder hanging in the warming air, and the gnawing thought that someone out there, someone they couldn't see, had just reached into a fight they were losing, and started pulling them back from the edge. He didn't know who they were or why they were here. But in the space of 5 shots, the impossible had shifted into barely possible, and for the first time since the trap was sprung, it felt like they might actually live through it. The ridge kept speaking for them. Each crack of the unseen rifle punched a new hole in the kill zone, carving a path where none had existed a minute before. Mason didn't waste the gift. He signaled the move, short, sharp gestures cutting through the haze. The team rose in staggered order, firing in bursts, dragging the wounded with them. Rivera leaned heavy on Daly's shoulder, his leg wrapped tight with Harris's tourniquet. Mason took the rear, eyes scanning the rock edges, waiting for the next threat to show itself. The enemy fire had lost its rhythm. It came now in scattered bursts, panicked and blind, answered every time by the single, measured reply from the ridge. One shot, one body gone. The space between cracks was just long enough to take another step, to drag another man to cover. They moved like they'd been trained quick to strip ammo and gear from the fallen, faster still to reload. Mason scooped up a fresh mag from a dropped chest rig, slammed it home without slowing. The air was thick with kicked-up grit, every breath harsh in the throat. Above the gunfire, the radio finally cleared, the static breaking apart to reveal the clipped voice of their air support. Extraction coordinates came through in bursts, barely audible over the fight, but it was enough. Mason keyed the mic twice in confirmation and kept them moving. By the time they reached the shallow bend in the wadi, the rifle fire from the ridge was already working ahead of them, clearing positions they hadn't even seen yet. Each shot felt like an invisible hand pulling them forward, buying seconds they couldn't afford to lose. The sun was higher now, burning down in white heat, turning the dust into a shimmering veil. Through it, the dark shape of the extraction bird appeared low on the horizon, rotors chopping the air. The last 100 yards felt longer than the rest of the fight combined. The bird's downdraft hit them with the smell of hot oil and exhaust, whipping the dust into small cyclones around their boots. They shoved the wounded inside first, Harris following, still holding pressure on Rivera's leg. Daly clambered in next, his cracked plate clinking against the metal deck. Mason stayed until the last man was up, his rifle still aimed at the ridge. He didn't see the shooter at first. Then, through the rippling heat, a shape emerged just long enough to be real. A lone figure, small against the scale of the mountain, rifle slung low now, shoulders turned as if the job was already done. Mason grabbed the binoculars from the seat beside him, lifting them with hands still vibrating from the fight. Through the glass, the image sharpened. The figure paused, one hand on the rifle's grip, the other steadying against the slope. No face, just the shadow of a brim pulled low and the glint of glass from a scope catching the sun. Then they moved, melting into the jagged stone until there was nothing left but rock and haze. Mason lowered the binoculars as the bird lifted, the valley shrinking below, the wadi already swallowing the evidence of the fight. No one spoke. There was no debrief, no guess at names or units. Just the unspoken truth running through each of them that someone they didn't know, someone they couldn't even thank, had stood on that ridge and decided they lived today. The bird banked toward base, rotors roaring, and the ridge slid out of sight. The legend of the unseen shooter stayed behind, buried in the dust and stone, waiting for the next time the valley closed its teeth on men who thought they'd seen everything.